Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show. David Rubin has a website called davidrubinisrael.com. And it's David Rubin, the trusted voice of Israel. I've had David on so many times over the last bunch of years. He is an absolute trusted voice is probably an understatement, because this is a guy who has been a victim of terrorism. He has been the mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's a spokesperson. He's a commentator. He's an author. In fact, he's got a brand new book out called Sparks from Zion, How We Can Understand the Attention Focused on the Nation of Israel. And he is in Israel today, and he's also a voter as well. And we welcome back to the show David Rubin here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. David, always an honor to have you on the show. How are you?
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm doing fine, and I appreciate your call.
And always good to have you in. And you also have written The Islamic Tsunami, Israel and America in the Age of Obama. You're the founder of the Shiloh Israel Childrens Fund. You know, I oftentimes am remiss in not having you talk about the fact you've been a victim of terror. And, of course, in a day and age when we hear so much about terror around the world with ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah and all the various groups out there, Al-Qaeda, you and your son were actually victims of terrorism, and you actually started the Shiloh Israel Childrens Fund, I think, as a result. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I did. After my 3-year-old son and I were wounded, and this happened as we were coming back from Jerusalem, driving in the car, and the car was ambushed by Islamic terrorists who were perched on the side of the road with AK-47 assault rifles. I was shot in the leg, my son was shot in the head, and we miraculously survived the attack. In fact, the bullet that went into my son's head and through his neck missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. So we were very blessed on that day, and as a result of that, and the subsequent psychological trauma, as well as the physical operations, I started the Shiloh Israel Childrens Fund for the purpose of healing the trauma of the terror victim children and rebuilding the biblical heartland of Israel through those children. So that's what I'm actively involved in, and anyone who wants more information can go to ShilohIsraelChildren.org. That's Shiloh, S-H-I-L-O-H, IsraelChildren.org.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, I had completed what I was saying, and
okay.
I didn't remember the previous question.
Not a problem. The Sparks from Zion, the new book you've written,
yes.
and one of the things it has underneath there is, how can we understand the attention focused on the nation of Israel as the free world struggles with the dilemma of how to combat ISIS and other manifestations of Islamic fundamentalism? Israel appears on the front lines and in the news like no other nation right now. You are still a target. Your nation is still a target of Islamic extremism, doesn't matter, and even state-run extremism if you listen to what's being said in Iran. Obviously, I'm sure you're sitting back, as many are, watching what's happening with the Iranian negotiations with the United States and other nations right now in this multi-nation conference. What are your thoughts as you sit back and you watch this happening in Iran, and you also see some of the other things that are happening around the world? What do you think in relationship to the future of Israel?
Well, we're in a very precarious state. We're a country that is barely the size of New Jersey. We're surrounded by ISIS and Hamas, who are aligned. Hezbollah, who is aligned with ISIS and Hamas as well, even though Hezbollah has a sort of an ethnic problem with ISIS. It's kind of interesting. We have Hamas in the south, and ISIS has been encroaching on Hamas's territories and working together with them. In the north, we have this threat from Hezbollah, which has 100,000 missiles pointed at Israel. And of course, the Iranians, who are supporting all three of, well, those Iranians are actually supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, and they're vigorously trying to get a nuclear bomb and to have a deal signed with the Obama administration, with the United States, that will enable them to have that nuclear bomb. So all of this is going on in our tiny little country, and we are in a very, very precarious state. Yes, there are internal disagreements between the different Islamic terrorist organizations, which are mainly based on ethnic factors and ethnic differences, but the bottom line is they are all trying to carry through this Islamic tsunami against Israel and against Western civilization. And that's a reality that I think the beheadings from ISIS have brought to life, because a lot of Americans were kind of looking the other way and didn't want to face up to it. But it's a reality.
Let me ask you a question, David. I don't know if I've ever asked you this before. Many in America look at the beheadings. They look at ISIS. We saw the polls taken that people were very, very worried about them. It was, everything was going up, that all of a sudden ISIS was a much more immediate threat to us than they had been prior to that. Of course, our own president said they were a JV team there for a while. Obviously, they've moved to the varsity level. But as an Israeli, how do you live each day? I mean, here you are since 1945, basically a country that you mentioned having missiles pointed at you, terrorism on a daily basis. How do you live? What's the mindset every day you get up? I mean, because here you sit in not a big country at all, and yet you've been attacked a number of times. I can't even name one. 1967, 73, 56, 48. I mean, and the potential is always there. So what is the mindset, if you can, of most Israelis, and you could use yourself as an example, when you get up every day and you go about living your day? What does living the day really mean?
Well, we're a very resilient people, you have to know. Any people that's been through the Holocaust, when 6 million of its people were murdered, and that has been through countless wars. It seems like every couple of years we're in a new war, and that has known so much suffering. A people like that still survives doesn't just roll over and play dead when this happens.
Right.
We go forward. We go forward with our lives. We live our lives. We send our children off to school and we look after them. We go to work. We do everything that all the things that people do around the world, and we don't let it hold us back. We continue with our lives. We continue to rejoice in life. And we, unfortunately, we have to contend with a lot of death and destruction as well.
Yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu, your prime minister, came out and said that if he is reelected, there would be no Palestinian state. Obviously raised a few ears and a few eyebrows around the world, not the least of which here in the United States. What were your thoughts when you heard him say that? Well,
I was happy to hear it. I would like to see him follow through on it.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the Palestinians, if we're going to agree that they're people, and which is certainly open to question, then I certainly don't think that any reasonable-minded, objective person can look at this people and say that they deserve to have their own independent state in the heartland of Israel. And Israel is the only country in this part of the world, in the land of Israel. We're the only country that ever was sovereign here, and mind you, we were a sovereign nation here for over 1,000 years. And in 1948, Israel wasn't born; Israel was reestablished, and there was never a state, a country called Palestine here. There was a territory called Palestine, mm-hmm. But it was called Palestine because the Romans gave it that name 1,900 years ago, and they drove the Jews from the land of Israel. Anyone who says to me, well, why don't you set up a Palestinian state? So I say to them, okay, tell me, why should there be a Palestinian state? And no one can really answer that question because there never was a country called Palestine here, and as a people that has supported and led the way in encouraging Islamic terrorism around the world, I don't think there's any people that deserves to have a state less than they do.
A lot of people aren't really aware, and we're talking with David Rubin this morning, who is the author of a number of books, Sparks from Zion, former mayor, and I always say of Shiloh, I guess that's a pronunciation there, but Shiloh. I live over, by the way, next to a little place called Shiloh, Pennsylvania. But you're the former mayor of Shiloh. You're also the founder of the Shiloh Israel Childrens Fund. how does your electoral system work there? I don't think a lot of people are really aware when you go to cast ballots. Have you cast your ballot yet, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
I went to the polls first thing in the morning.
Okay, so I will not ask you about your choice. That's not my purpose. But when you cast ballots, I mean, you're casting them strictly for a. Are you casting them for a party, or are you casting them for the person in that party that you want to be prime minister?
You vote for the party.
Okay.
And the leader of that party would be that party's candidate for prime minister. Now, prime minister will be selected from one of the two largest parties.
So you have, I guess, Isaac Herzog in the one party, and you have obviously Prime Minister Netanyahu as the head of the Likud party, right?
Yes, Herzog is on the left, and Netanyahu is on the right. And whichever one of those two individuals is chosen, they would have to form a majority coalition of the members of Knesset in order to have a government.
And of course, for a lot of people out there, Knesset is your parliament. For a lot of people out there not familiar with that terminology. But go ahead, David.
That is correct. That is correct. So the candidate the party that wins the most votes isn't necessarily going to be the party that forms the coalition.
Yeah, I remember one time, I think it was, and I believe it was Benjamin Netanyahu, finished second but became the prime minister. Am I correct on that?
That is correct, because there are more parties that lean to the right than parties that lean to the left.
So while these are the two main parties, there are a lot of other, shall I say, factions in there, or other smaller parties that have interests in there that maybe align again one way or the other, right?
That's right. There are likely to be about 8 parties that will be in the next Knesset.
Wow. Now, they have a period of time. You probably won't know the results today of your election, will you?
It's highly unlikely. There may be projections, probably will be projections, when the polls close at 10 p.m., but that's no guarantee that it's going to be correct. I recall the election back in 1996 when everyone thought that Shimon Peres of the left-wing Labor Party was the winner. In fact, I remember going to sleep, and I didn't support Peres, but and I supported Netanyahu. That was his first election, and the first election for prime minister. And I went to sleep feeling very disappointed at about midnight. And after seeing the victory speeches by Peres and his people, the following morning we woke up to hear that Netanyahu actually won. So I would take these projections with a grain of salt, unless it's such a clear-cut difference. Right. But again, even so, there could be results from the elections. It doesn't mean that the left is going to be able to form a coalition, and in fact, they may have a very hard time forming a coalition.
Now, you hear a lot of pundits say in this country, and I've read a lot from here and around the world, who say, well, Netanyahu is not very popular right now, that he's got a lot of opposition there and that kind of thing, and that when he came to the United States the other week, that was a bad thing. I wanted to get your comments on all those little things right now. That, how popular is he in your country? Does he get a lot of opposition? And what were your thoughts when he came and spoke a couple weeks ago here to our Congress?
Well, I think that he spoke very well. He said everything that needed to be said when he spoke to Congress, and I think he gave out a lot of important information about the Iranian nuclear program and this deal that is in formation, which is very dangerous, not just for Israel, but also for the United States. The Iranians are building intercontinental missiles, not to strike Israel, because Israel is quite close to Iran, but to strike the United States. So Netanyahu he succeeded in giving out a lot of important information in Israel, because his speech was in the middle of an election campaign. So the criticism and the praise went right down the middle. It was pretty much based on on who the individual supports in the upcoming elections, and so it was hard to get a lot of objectivity in the reviews of Netanyahu's presentation.
So you have the same problem in your country we have in our country, obviously. Hey, when we come back, I want to ask you how long, roughly, we could maybe expect to have before we find out who the winner is, and some other thoughts. David Rubin, our very special guest here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show, live from Israel on the day when they are holding their elections, a very important one in their country, and I know a lot here in the United States, particularly our president is watching. And we'll ask David about how our president is seen in Israel. All that out ahead here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show. We're with David Rubin, who is written a brand new book called Sparks from Zion. David, do you have a rough idea? I guess no one really has an exact time or anything where they give to form a coalition government after today's vote is all said and done and tallied?
Well, it's going to take some time. The way it works here is that the president, which is basically a ceremonial post, akin to the Queen of England, doesn't have much political role, but he will be given the task of appointing the candidate who he thinks should be allowed to form the next government. So let's say that Herzog gets the most votes, and the president meets with all different heads of the parties, and the majority of them recommend that Herzog be given the task. Mm-hmm. So then Herzog would have 21 days to form a coalition, to negotiate with the other parties, to form a majority coalition. And if he's unable to do that in 21 days, then the president can either give him an extension of another 21 days, or he can give the task over to Netanyahu. Wow. Okay, and of course the roles could be reversed in that, depending on who the president decides is the one that is the leader that would best represent the people.
Wow. I mean, that's a fascinating process to me. So once you get, let's suppose your party ends up getting the most votes. You then have 21 days to put together a coalition government. So tell me if I'm wrong, but you better be a pretty darn good salesman and have something to sell, right?
That's for sure. That's for sure. But the point is that each of the heads of the parties will be having meetings in the next week with the president. Right. And they will share their opinions about who they think would be the best prime minister of Israel. And, so after a campaign when nobody can say anything good about anybody else, they're going to have a frank, honest discussion with the president, and they will be recommending either Mr. Herzog or Mr. Netanyahu. And then the president will have to make the decision based on how many of these party leaders are supporting each particular candidate. So
where does the will of the people kind of figure into that whole thing? Because I'm a little fuzzy on that part.
Okay, well, the party leaders represent the people. They're Israel. On one hand, it's one of the least stable democracies in terms of the endurance, the durability of the terms. Mm-hmm. Where you could have elections every 2 years, and in some cases. But on the other hand, it's arguably the most democratic of any nation in the world, because you have all these different parties that represent all these different views. Like nobody could say that he can't find a party that he agrees with.
At the end of all this, with all you said the bickering among candidates, and then nobody could say a nice thing about each other. But what is the one thing that you would say all Jewish people would say? You better have this somewhere in your platform if you're going to be our leader. That you are willing to take the necessary risks for the survival of the state of Israel. Yeah, I kind of thought that.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, if a nuclear bomb is hanging over us, if Israel is being attacked on all sides, the whole country comes together like one family.
Finally, we hear a lot of different talk about how President Obama and the United States are looked at by Israel right now. As far as you can ascertain, how is President Obama looked at by Israel, and how is the United States held by Israel right now? About a minute and a half left.
Right now, I think that most Israelis understand that Obama has not been a friendly president towards Israel. That is very clear. There's not, almost across the board. And there were some on the left that actually like to utilize Obama for their own political purposes, because they also want to create a Palestinian state. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of Israelis do not consider Obama to be a pro-Israel president. And what was the other question? How is Netanyahu viewed?
Well, no, basically how the United States is viewed today. Are we viewed along with President Obama, or are we viewed separately?
Okay. So the United States, I mean, sometimes it's hard to make that distinction, and I do so all the time with Israelis. That the Obama administration may not be very pro-Israel, but the United States as a whole is pro-Israel, identifies with our common values, and much as the founding fathers of the United States did, appreciates the biblical heritage of Israel and what it means for the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to davidrubinisrael.com. You can also check out the brand new book, Sparks from Zion. David, it's always an honor having you on. We can't wait to see what the results are of this election. Thanks so much for being with me today. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, Gary.
Take care, my friend. Thank you so much.